Is a fair public education a human right? The history of the American education system can be divided into three distinct time periods. The first being the time during the American colonies, where Puritans wanted to ensure that all citizens knew how to read the Bible. This led to a stressed importance on universal literacy. However, due to the homogeneity of morals, public education became rooted in local schools at this time. Therefore, depending on where someone lived, their education was different. After the Revolutionary War, Thomas Jefferson provided the idea that education was an important factor for each citizen to become a valuable member of society. Despite his efforts, many people still favored private education, meaning that public education did not become very important until the 19th century. During the 19th century, which was also called the Common School period, public education finally became a popular idea. Due to the high cost of private schools and the sudden influx of immigrants after the War of 1812, there was a sudden need for the public to find a new way to integrate the new, larger population. The Supreme Court has a pretty significant role in public education. One case is the parents involved in community schools versus the Seattle School District. This was a class action suit by concerned parents, arguing that a 1922 Oregon statute that mandated children between the ages of 8 and 16 to attend public school was limiting their ability to choose their children's schooling, wanting to enroll their children in better private schools. The inequality of county schools was affected by the federal and state funding of these schools, as well as by white flight to the suburbs in the 1950s and 60s. This statute was declared unconstitutional, letting parents enroll their children in private schools. Another case is Serrano versus Priest. This was a class action lawsuit by parents in a poor school district in California. This state was funding its schools through local property taxes, disadvantaging those in lower income areas. This was proven unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, stating that education is essential to further free enterprise, as well as that it has a deep impact on members of society. While this was declared unconstitutional, it was very difficult for California to fund its schools through the state government, causing them to relapse into the local funding procedures for which they were challenged for. San Antonio versus Rodriguez was a class action lawsuit by parents of San Antonio, Texas. Schools there were funded by local property tax, and these parents argued that it was unconstitutional, as it unfairly funded the schools under the Equal Protection Clause, similar to Serrano versus Priest. However, this was ruled constitutional, and the court dismissed the possibility of de facto segregation, passing school funding issues to the state government instead of the federal one. This set the precedent that all states could continue to fund their schools through local property taxes. Plyler versus Doe was another case out of the state of Texas. It was a class action suit by a group of undocumented Mexican students who were challenging a statute that was forcing undocumented families to pay tuition for public schools. This was declared unconstitutional because under the Equal Protection Clause, a resident of the U.S. is entitled to a public education whether they are a citizen or not. As a result of these cases, many states only hold education as a substantial right, not a basic right. Because the court was contradictory in their own beliefs about the system, the states are able to do what they please. This means that affording funding unequally or insufficiently is permissive under state law. This graph expresses the federal funding for public schools by state in 2008. The Constitution does not have any clauses addressing education as a federal right, as it is enumerated under these state-level powers. This means that states can do whatever they please while mandating public education. While some think that this could change in the near future, amending the Constitution is an arduous process and will most likely not happen soon. In 2012, only 8% of the public schools budget came from federal funding. Congress passed a budget not allowing increases in public spending for education, even though 91% of school children in grades K through 12 attend public school. Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or the ESEA, provides financial assistance to schools and educational agencies with high levels of low-income families, but this is underfunded. The ESEA was first passed to address vast inequalities based on skin color and groups of lower-income families, enacted around the same time as the Civil Rights Act. However, 3.3 million children attend Title I schools that remain underfunded. Also, 5,750 Title I schools have continuously received much lower funding than their non-Title I counterparts of the same school districts by approximately $2 billion. The Every Student Succeeds Act, or the ESSA, proposes a plan to supplement that $2 billion in an attempt to provide the highest need students with additional assistance. This graph shows how national funding for education has gone down in the past few years and only continues to follow this trend. A fundamental right is defined as something that involves experience with history and tradition as well as exhibits an importance to a level of autonomy. If the federal government were to regard education as a human right, this would mean that any regulation of public education would be subject to strict scrutiny. This would mean that the federal government would need to completely finance all public education, which is unrealistic. There needs to be some way to get more funding to these schools, which is why many states fund their schools through local property taxes. Many argue that parents should be able to provide an education for their children based on their financial ability, allowing parents who exist in a higher income bracket to provide a better, presumably private education for their children than parents living in lower income communities. Many also believe that education is not and has never been a human right. It is instead a privilege awarded to families by democratic societies. Having a stable enough government to provide education is a privilege, and therefore parents should be able to choose where to send their children to school. This graphic explains how many citizens have more faith in private schools than in public ones, proving that if they had the choice, people would rather send their children to private school rather than public. For many students, school not only serves as a place of education, but also as a place of safety and protection for them during the day. They also may only get their only full meal from their school, making it a place of sanctuary for these children. Education also provides the tools needed for success in society. Many people are able to move through social stratification, but only if given proper education and allowed the chance to grow academically. Furthermore, many careers do not hire people without bachelor's degrees, or at least a high school diploma, meaning that a proper education is vital to a person's possible career success. This graph explains the percent of low-income students in U.S. public schools by state, showing that many people still rely on public education in order to get what they need to go further in life. Trump's Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, plans to privatize education, moving towards a tuition system with supplementary vouchers. She would like public schools to only exist in the capacity of religious charter schools. There has also been repeated requests to reevaluate the federal funding of public education, causing for Congress to put a freeze on any increases in federal funding because of their bipartisan gridlock. There has also been a push to view education with an importance towards school choice. The Trump administration has repeatedly exhibited that they would like to work towards a public school system where parents choose what school their child attends. However, this would make it exceedingly more difficult for parents who can only afford a low-cost education. This graph shows how the percentage of each state's funding for their public schools in local, state, and federal taxes. Then there is also the national median and how each state compares. Public schools remain unequal. Schools in suburban areas continue to have better funding due to their wealthier citizens than those in urban areas. States have approached this issue in their own way, including magnet schools, scholarship programs, and funding by standardized testing. While people come from different walks of life, it is important to understand that being a part of American society should award every citizen with a fair education regardless of their financial means. While this is still a debate, schools are continuously underfunded in favor of misconstructed funding plans and private education, hurting the generations that supply us with our future.